Hello Internet, welcome to Lex Universe. For those of you who know me for a longer time, you know that I want to travel to every country in the world. For those of you who don't, well, I do. So, anyway, what exactly does it mean? If you go see my Instagram profile, which you can see here, if you haven't followed me yet, please do that. I post content every day and it's always something related to my YouTube videos. But if you see my bio, you can see something like I have visited 48 countries. What does it even mean? Which countries do I count? What is a country? And how many countries there are in the world? If I want to visit them all, how many are there? Well, there are 193 countries in the United Nations. So that's all about this video. Thank you for watching. If you did enjoy this, it would be very easy, wouldn't it? Of course, the question is a lot more complicated. So let's discuss it in this video. So before we begin, if you are new to this channel, please consider subscribing to my video. I usually do travel videos. Sometimes there is some educational video about geography or traveling in general. So if you're interested in that, go check my channel, go subscribe to me if you enjoy my content. I promise you I will give you a new video every week. But let's talk about countries. What is a country? Well, the answer to this question is not really simple. First of all, what most people consider a country is a sovereign country, which is a country that is self-governing, it is internationally recognized, and in the best case scenario, it's a member of the United Nations. If you are one of these people, then there are 193 member states of the United Nations. But even that is not really accurate. There are 2 non-member observant states in the United Nations, and most of the international community does recognize them as countries. First of all is the Vatican City, which is not a member of the United Nations, but it is represented in the United Nations as an observer state by the Holy See. What is the Holy See? That is a whole other can of worms that I don't want to get into. The second observer state is the state of Palestine, which is currently governing the territory of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip in the Middle East. And while it's still not recognized as the full sovereign self-governing country by every state in the world, it is considered part of the United Nations in this way. Well, the good thing about most of these countries is that they are fully internationally recognized. Yeah, that's a lie. You know, when we talk about the recognized and unrecognized countries, and I will get to the later, but even the internationally recognized countries that are considered such, these 195 or 93 countries, they are not fully recognized. There are some countries that do not recognize them. Like, for example, the People's Republic of China is recognized by the majority of countries around the world, but some of them chose to recognize the Republic of China on Taiwan. But that's just the most jarring example. There are other examples. The South and North Korea do not recognize each other because they both consider themselves the Seoul Korea. Then there is Azerbaijan, who doesn't recognize Armenia. Well, wonder why. But let's just not think that every country that is within the United Nations is recognized by everyone. Saying that, let's make things a little bit more complicated, because there is one other internationally recognized entity of international law that is recognized by most countries. I just said recognize a lot. Anyway, it is the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. No, not you. This one. The Sovereign Military Order of Malta doesn't really govern over any territory, but it is still considered subject of the international law. They have their own currency, they have their own government, they just don't have any territory. But if you really want to visit some places that could be considered territory of the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, well, they have some embassies that are not their territory, but there are extraterritorial parts of them, I guess. Well, you can visit their palace in Rome. Anyway, let's not count them towards the countries, but they still do exist, so shout out to the Military Order of Malta. And by the way, if you're watching this in the future, you can see the video about this order in the upper right corner. Before we start talking about the unrecognized countries, let's talk about two weird entities in the Oceania. And these are the Cook Islands and the island of Niue. These two entities are countries. They are self-governing, but they have never declared independence, and they are freely associated with New Zealand. Weird thing about this is they are not fully internationally recognized, but the sole reason for that is because they never asked for it. But they still are a country. They are self-governing, just some parts of their international politics is done in Wellington. But they are countries. So now we can raise the number of our countries to 197. But it doesn't end there, does it? Well, you could see the thumbnail of my video, so you know there will be a lot more countries to come. Because now let's get to the more controversial topics, the unrecognized countries. Well, let's start with the countries that are not unrecognized, they are partially recognized, which means that there are some internationally recognized countries that are members of the United Nations that do recognize these entities. There are 6 of them. Yeah, it's a lot more than many people would expect, and when I start talking about this, it's really interesting to consider that some of these countries actually are members of several international organizations. I will talk about it a little bit later, but keep in mind that while not all of them are members of the United Nations, well, actually none of them are, but they could be members of other international organizations. I will sort them now based on the number of countries that do recognize them. Well, first of all, there is Kosovo. Kosovo is recognized by 100 countries all around the world, by 100 UN countries. When I say by how many countries it is recognized, that's what I mean, always, you know. So that's Kosovo. The second on the list is kind of surprising, and that is the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, also known as the West Sahara. This country was declared independent somewhere in the 70s, and ever since then it's been occupied by the country of Morocco. This country is recognized as a sovereign nation by 84 countries around the world, which is quite a lot actually, and it really surprised me. I never knew that. I never knew that. You know, quite a lot of countries have very strong international bonds with Morocco, but they do still recognize this as the independent country, and their occupation of the West Sahara is quite frowned upon, but largely ignored. But it is recognized by 84 countries, and therefore it belongs to this list. It doesn't really govern any territory. There is this very narrow strip of a country of the east part of Western Sahara that is actually governed by the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, but unfortunately almost nobody lives there because it's just a desert. Most of their territory is occupied by Morocco. Then of course we have Taiwan. 15 countries around the world do recognize Taiwan as an independent country. Mostly they are some small nations in the Oceania that do have some strong bonds with Taiwan, or as it is called officially, the Republic of China. But ever since the Republic of China was officially acknowledged by the United Nations, Taiwan has been largely left. Well, I don't want to say it was left alone, because while most countries do not officially recognize Taiwan, they have very strong economic and even political bonds with the country, and they do cooperate very strongly. In most cases, even more strongly than with the People's Republic, which is kind of controversial, at least from the PRC's perspective, but well, you get what you get. They are not officially recognized, but you can find unofficial embassies of Taiwan in almost every country, and actually the Taiwanese passport is quite strong and you can get to many countries around the world even without a visa, which is not the case in the countries that are to come. There are 3 other countries that are recognized by some of the UN nations, but these are very limited. First of all, there is the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. If you're interested more in this country, you can visit my video about it. I think it's quite informative, but long story short, this country is only recognized by Turkey. And also, I don't want to say occupied by Turkey, but the Turkish army has very strong presence on the north of the island of Cyprus, and they do basically make sure that this country still exists up to this day. The history of Cyprus is very complicated. I don't want to get into it in this video. Go watch my video about Northern Cyprus. I think it's a lot more informative about that. But yeah, that's one other country that could be considered a country, and well, it does exist. Then we have the Republic of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, or Ossetia. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, I'm sorry. Anyway, these two countries are officially, from the international standpoint, part of Georgia, but one internationally recognized country, Russia, does recognize them as independent countries, so we put them on this list. But their case is pretty much the same as in the case of Northern Cyprus. So now we got to 203 countries. Now what? Well, then of course we have some officially unrecognized countries, which are countries that no other country that is member of the United Nations does recognize. The problem with these countries is you could put there a lot of like these fun projects like Sealand or Liberty Land, or some of these weird ideas that someone thinks, oh, there is this island in the middle of the river that none of the countries claim, so I will declare my empire here. Well, this is not something that I will talk about this in this video, but I'll just consider that even such crazy people do exist. But what I want to enlist here in my list of countries, there are some other countries that do have some control of some territory. They do have de facto sovereignty, they just do not get recognized by any other countries. The first of them is Transnistria. This very narrow strip of Moldova east of the Dniester River is self-governing. It is internationally recognized part of Moldova, but it basically governs its territory. They have their own currency, army, president, parliament. They have been sort of de facto independent for the past 30 years, and well, nobody is actually like trying to change that, so I hope I will get to Transnistria this year, so stay tuned for that. Could be a very interesting trip. Then there is the Republic of Artsakh, or as many people around the world know it as Nagorno-Karabakh. It has been quite famous this year because there was quite a deadly war there between Armenia and Azerbaijan. This is basically internationally recognized part of Azerbaijan, but it is inhabited by native Armenians, and they have declared their independence from the Republic of Azerbaijan really some 30 years ago, and ever since then it's been a very hot place. It's only accessible for Armenia, and if you ever get there, please consider never going to Azerbaijan. You could get really fined, if not imprisoned. But they still do have control over their own territory. Moving on, there is the Republic of Somaliland, which you can find in the northern part of internationally recognized Somalia. This country has also been independent for the past 30 years. It's not recognized, but you know, when I talk about these unrecognized countries, then mostly these are some really poor neighborhoods of their let's say mother country. I'm sorry to everybody who lives in these countries and if I just offended you, but you know what I mean. In case of Somalia and Somaliland, actually if you want to travel to Somalia, it's a lot more easier and a lot safer to travel to Somaliland than to the internationally recognized Somalia, because that's just a broken state. It doesn't really work. But Somaliland is actually quite safe. It's I would say quite a safe haven in the West Africa, or in the Horn of Africa. There are actually like direct flights to Somaliland from Dubai, maybe from Qatar, from Istanbul. I'm not even sure. But the countries that do not recognize Somaliland have flights to Somaliland, which is kind of adorable, because most of the countries that I talked about before, they do not have any international flights because they do not have any internationally recognized airports and they're not part of IATA. Well, then of course we have to consider two more countries in this, and well, it really suit yourself. If you are from Ukraine, I'm really sorry for mentioning this, but the truth is that the Donetsk People's Republic and the Lugansk People's Republic have been sticking around for the past 7 years, and they are kind of doing their own business, but they're in the stage of the constant war, I guess, or stalemate, or Cold War with Ukraine. So, well, that's that. But they've been around for 7 years, so why not mentioning them right now? So that got us to some 210 countries. Well, it doesn't end there. When you look at the International Olympic Committee, well, then you can see that members of this international organization, you can find 206 countries or members. How is that possible? Because right now we kind of need to stretch a little bit what the definition of a country is. When we talk about sovereign countries, even the examples that I've mentioned before don't necessarily follow this rule, but what we will talk about right now are definitely not sovereign countries, and they don't even claim to be. When we look at the International Olympic Committee or organization or whatever it's called, there are 206 countries. Among them, there are some of these unrecognized countries. You can find there Taiwan, which has been represented by the name of Chinese Taipei. You can also find there Kosovo, which fights at the Olympics. But then you can find some examples like Puerto Rico or Aruba. What does this mean? Well, we are getting to some countries that are not actually countries. They are part of another country. They do not claim to not be part of that, their mother country. They just have such a large amount of autonomy that they basically are self-governing. In this case, we can talk about quite a lot of territories. We usually call them dependencies, and many of them are just that. Also, when we strip the adjective sovereign from the country, we can also talk about some countries that are a country, but they're not sovereign, and they don't even claim to be, except for some exceptions. Against you, Scotland. Anyway, there are 4 constituent countries of the United Kingdom, and in some other cases there are some federations that do consist of several countries. Well, you can have the realm of Netherlands, which consists of the Netherlands that you can find in Europe, but then you have Aruba, for example, or Saint Martin, which are also part of the Kingdom of Netherlands. It's just, well, its own thing, in a way. And I don't even want to talk about France, because France is weird. Like, seriously. You cannot be the closest nation to the New Zealand and have the longest borders with Brazil and still call yourself a European country. I'm sorry, France, you're on your own. But anyway, many of... I'm sorry. I love France. It's such a weird country. But anyway, many of the French overseas departments and dependencies are sometimes considered their own countries, like French Guiana or Saint Martin or the French Polynesia. Like, when you look at Tahiti or Bora Bora, you don't think of France, do you? I don't. And many other people don't. So that kind of brings us to some 250 countries. Because, well, while not all of them are independent, they have such a large amount of autonomy that we could consider them a country. Like, when you go to Greenland or the Faroe Islands, they are part of Denmark, but you really don't feel like you're in Denmark, and they don't feel to be Danish. That's just how it is. But we will probably stretch it even more right now, because now I want to get to the number that you can see on the thumbnail of this video. 262. What is this number? You can guess now. Oh, you're still there. Good. Well, The most stretched way how to count countries around the world is how many there are country codes and the flag emojis. Because in case you haven't noticed, if you are using Microsoft and you used some of the flag emojis that you put there somewhere on an iPhone or Android, and then you display it in Windows, you can see that instead of the flag emoji, you can see the country code. So these numbers do actually kind of correspond. So if the country has a country code, it usually has the flag emoji. There are 250 something country codes. There is a larger number of the emojis. The reason for that is that there are 5 emojis that do not represent a sovereign country or a country, which are the state of Texas, which is, I don't know why, anyway. And it's the only American state that has its own flag emoji, so go Texas. And then there are the 4 constituent countries of the United Kingdom. Then among the flags, the number is 262. Among them, you will also find the flag of the European Union, which is not a country, it's not even a state, it's something in between, something more than an international organization, something less than a federation. And then there is the flag of the United Nations. That brings me back to my Instagram. When you take a look at my posts, I start every post with a flag of the country that this post is related to. When I was in Northern Cyprus, I couldn't use the flag of Northern Cyprus because it doesn't have a country code. It doesn't exist according to, well, whoever is deciding which flag emojis there will be. But anyway, I'm using the UN. But we can all agree that the United Nations is also not a country. So that brings us to some 255 countries. Well, this is something that I wanted to share with you, but it doesn't really mean that I consider everything that is on this list of 265 entities a country. Because when I say I want to travel to every country in the world, and when you look at my Instagram and you see that I have visited 48 of them, I only consider the 195 fully recognized countries. So when I went to Northern Cyprus, this number on my Instagram didn't rise one country. And while it is possible, well, it's not possible, I will probably not even make the 195, but give me hope. Anyway, while it is possible that I will travel to Madeira, that I will travel to Bora Bora, that I will go to Cook Islands, really, only the countries that are recognized and are somehow associated with the United Nations do count on my Instagram. But when we consider this on the larger scale, you can really think that there are a lot more countries around the world because, you know, I will show you something. This is my scratch map of the world. And the point is, if you want to visit every country, and, well, I don't really consider just going to the airport and just flying away to the next country, which is why I never colored Qatar, because I only visited the airport. But, you know, if you take a look at this map, then I could probably go to New York, I could go to Moscow and to Beijing and to, I don't know, Sydney, and at that point I would have, let's say, almost half of the world traveled. That's not the point of traveling, is it? So, it's a goal. I want to visit every country in the world, but not at the expense that I just go to the country, I visit the capital or any other country or any other city, and I will just go away. That's why I covered only the east coast of the USA when I was there, because, well, there's a lot more to explore, isn't it? So, in this map, I do not approach it completely like on my Instagram. When I have the country count, well, it's a thing. But here, when I was in Spain, I scratched Spain. But the Canary Islands are still ready to be explored. So when you consider it in this way, when you think about traveling the world, about visiting the countries, which I kind of do, then it's okay. It's your life, you can have your goals, I have mine, which really doesn't go along with what I want to do in my life, but I thought it's good to have something to aim for. But on the other hand, is it really that important how many countries there are? Because, well, to answer that, no. But is it important whether Northern Cyprus is part of Cyprus or not? Well, it is. It really is. Because the international law doesn't really tell you what the reality is. If you say you're going to Cyprus and you want to visit Kyrenia, which is in the north, you cannot say that you will only follow the Cypriot law, that you will only follow the entry requirements of the Republic of Cyprus, because it will do you next to nothing when you cross that unrecognized country boundaries, because at that point then they do not have the authority. And the same thing goes for the French overseas territories. You may have your Schengen visa, which means you can travel all across Europe, you can enter France, but you cannot go to Tahiti. And that's something that really needs to be considered. If you travel around the world, there are a lot of countries. Whether you consider them a country or not, they're always their own things. And I know I have a limited time span here on this earth. And across all the years that are still ahead of me, and please, I hope I just won't get hit by a car the minute I finish filming this video. I want to visit as much of it. And, well, in that case, it's a lot nicer to aim for 262 countries than just some lame 195, isn't it? So, I hope I shed some light in this topic. I hope you found this video interesting. I really hope that it gave you some interesting facts that you didn't know. If you did know them, then at least you liked watching my face. I'm sorry, it's wine actually. Not pure. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, if you liked it, please give me a like. Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Everything you want to tell me, even things you don't want to tell me, it always helps with the algorithm. So just right there, hello Lex, how are you? I'm sure if many of you do that, it gets blocked by some anti-bot software, but anyway, just greet me in the comments and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of my videos, because some other educational videos are coming in the future, and even some travel videos which are coming every week. I hope you will enjoy them. Check out my other social media, go to my Instagram, you can there see the live count of the countries that I visited, and see you in the next video. Have a wonderful day. Ciao.